So good evening everyone. I'm Rajesh. Thank you so much for joining in. Very warm welcome. I'm super excited at the same time, very thrilled and nervous as well while I was talking to some of my friends what this particular session is going to be, right? So while I was discussing with some of the board members for ITTL, right, they have kind of conceptualized this entire session to be slightly unique. I would say one of its kind, which we've never done it in the past. Many a times when we talk about bridging the gap between industry and academia, right, we would come up with a lot of research insights where we would have industry experts or a stalwart who would talk about it, or we will have some experts from the academia part of it. They would share their expertise or they would share their challenges, right? Or we would also look at an open house kind of a thing where we would hear every individual perspective. But at the end of it, there is no strong key takeaway. Okay, in this session, next 45 minutes to an hour, we wanted to make it very, very exciting. At the same time, very insightful, meaningful, and we would like to take away some good insights out of this. So every time, when we talk about people who are there in the campus space, right, when I was talking to Ashish as well, many of us have spent about a decade and a half in the campus landscape, done significant impact in terms of recruiting talent, attracting talent, engaging with them, and eventually adding up to the overall economic growth of an organization. Even the educational institute have played a very significant role when it comes to adding up, giving great amount of talent and ensuring what needs to be done. But if we largely look at it at a macro level, when we talk about bridging the gap between industry and academia, there is no significant change which we have created, and including industry and academia front, right? To give kind of an analogy to that, right? If you look at the industry 1 to industry 5.2, the business world has kind of seen a significant transformation over the years, right? I mean, from the industry 1.2, where it started from mechanization, the industry 2.0 was about electrification, industry 3.0 was about automation, and industry 4.0, which it started in 2010, was largely into digitization. And in less than 10 years, right, if you look at the industry 1.0 to 2.0, it took about 100 years. From 2.0 to 3.0, it approximately took about 90 years. From the second one to the third one, it was less than 50 years. From 4.0 to 5, we are just taking about 10 years. And the industry 5.0 is all about humanization and personalization. So why this particular context is very important is the world is changing at a very rapid pace, and it becomes very difficult and it becomes extremely challenging for us to keep up the pace at which the technology is changing, the world is changing, the world is going through a lot of innovation, the world is going through a lot of disruption. So it's important as an industry experts and an academia to understand what is kind of missing and how do we embrace this. So every time when we think about implementing certain things, the dynamics would change. And as an individuals, when we have spent about a decade, 2 decades, and some of them who have spent enormous amount of time, right, who have set up the center of excellence, did a lot of things, whatever they could do at their capacity. Now, this particular session, what we would do is, we in the arrangement, the way it is being done is, we have some bit of industry experts in each table, and we also have academicians as well, where we want you to ideate some of the key ones. It can be 1 or 2. We will not go all over the place. Each teams, we would formulate like a team and would pick up 1 or 2 important topic which you think which is still not been addressed, and how as a team, how do you ideate, conceptualize, and how exactly we could come together to bring it to life, right? Many a times what happens is when we talk about bridging the gap, there are a lot of limitations. When I say limitation, the organization has a limitation. Can we invest on this institute because what's an ROI for us? Or there are institutes which would have that openness to make an impact. They have a limitation in terms of bid and ranking or having the right capital to make an investment there. So here we would look at a blue ocean strategy kind of an approach where we will take away all the limitations. You will not represent any institute, you will not represent any organization. Collectively, based on your experience and your expertise, what do you think which is missing today? And if academia and industry come together, what is that we can solve? And at the end of it, we would give about 10 minutes for each team. We want you to ideate, and we want one individual from your team to share an idea which we can implement it. It's not a great idea or a $1 billion idea we are looking at, something which is actionable. As soon as some of the academicians go back, they could discuss with the management and see how exactly we could implement. And some of the university recruiting leaders who are out here, we would also hear the perspective from academicians as well. What is some of the key takeaway for us to go back to our business and say that this is something which is very important, or we learned that this is the best practice which is still missing and which we'll go ahead and implement that. Okay, so with that, I mean, I would just act as a moderator. Thankfully, I'm not in this session, so I would run around and we would enable this, and we would require your full participation and make this entire session very useful. And this whole session would be recorded. As I told you, we will truly create a greater impact out of this session. We will have all the pointers which we will draw. And this particular event is also partnered with the business world, right? Business world people. We wanted to, since we have the industry experts and the academicians from some of the best institutes, right? We will gather key insights, and this will even, we will aim to publish it on the newspaper or the magazines of this, which will go online. Collectively, let's make it as a great success. Yeah. Thank you. So, and very important, now again, bridging the gap between industry and academia is a very, very large topic, right? From a corporate perspective, right? These are 4 things which we currently face as a challenge. One is the competency gap. With technology changing, it's very, very important that how do we ensure that we engage with the universities and ensure that the technology which is evolving is taught at the campus, or skilling, upskilling, reskilling, all of that stuff, right? The competency gap, how do we address that? And the second, the biggest one, I'm sure that all the industry folks would agree, the inclusion and diversity is one of the biggest challenge, right? One is the availability of the pool itself. So every time now, if you look at as an industry as a whole, in India, a lot of leaders are thinking that we should hit 50% gender diversity by 2030, which is a very ambitious target. For that to make it happen, the university recruiting talent plays a very, very pivotal role. In the laterals perspective, there is a very limited scope for us to make that happen. The only way is to happen is to infuse some of the great talent at the early careers. For this thing to happen, we should look at what is the pool available, or the second aspect is if there is a bias, right? And if there is a male student, we will visit only exclusive diversity campus, or we would be slightly lenient to the students who are girls, and eventually we will make that. How do we address this issue, right, in terms of the supply as well as having the bias in terms of the recruiting itself? The third one is the time and resource constraints. While we know certain things exist, but the biggest challenge is, can we invest time? Because at the end of the day, academics have their own agenda to drive in terms of technically the students needs to go through the syllabus, they have their own grading system and all of that. They have a very limited time for them to upskill themselves. From an industry standpoint, their objective is on the revenue side, objective in terms of the product developments and all of that. With the limitations of resource and time, how do we kind of still navigate and address this challenge? Then the communication is the soft challenge, means soft skill aspect of it. This is something which is out there, and again, this is a very light one which can be addressed with all the advent of the online education which is happening, or the MOOC part of it, and there's a lot of avenues to which we could solve. Now, from an academic university standpoint, right, the relevance of the syllabus itself is a big challenge, because majority of it, if we look at Tamil Nadu as a state, right, majority of them are affiliated to Anna University. If we look at Andhra and Telangana, either of them are affiliated to JNTU Kakinada, JNTU Anantapur, JNTU Hyderabad for that matter. In Karnataka, at least about 250 to 350 odd organizations are affiliated to VTU. There is a very limited scope for them to include any new concepts, because that requires a different shift altogether. With that limitation, how an organization can strive and thrive to incorporate the right technologies which is required from an industry standpoint. The proficiency necessity, which means while the world is going through massive transformation in terms of the cloud, all the new age technologies which is out there, how do you stay embraced with all the technologies which is out there? How do we get the insights of all of this? Limited exposure, industry exposure, and again here this requires two aspects of it. One is whether the organization have an appetite to invest. So there is an operational cost when we talk about industry exposure. Either an industry experts have to come to the academia, or the academic students have to go to our organization. How do we make it that happen is one of the biggest challenge which have to be addressed. And limited resources, right? I mean, any academic institutes have X number of manpower through which they could do very little in 365 days considering their academics as well. So these are some of the broader perspective, not limiting, but we just wanted to give you some insights for you to think through and slightly deeper on an action item on this. Okay, with that I will take a pause. We would request you to, we would give about 10-15 minutes each team to ideate and arrive at a very specific thing what we could address, and we would ask one representative from each team to share their insights. Thank you.
In academics, suppose you take the faculty members, and even if you look at the BCS faculty, entire India, there is no data science in there. Many of the top in there is no specialized faculty. So when you come for the night, how you can manage the...
No, sir, first discuss what is the problem statement, what are you trying to do?
We will go as per our mandate of the business. If the business mandate is not there, we will also go back to coding. Some institute who have labs inside. Now every institute has an incubation institute. So the institute has come up here. It's not going to your institute that we tie up here. We generally say that we will go to 100 different temples and we'll pray. Wherever we get prasadam, we'll come and take us. The relationship building is
my perspective. Sorry to say. See, today you are at 1,000. The next year, the placement was great, 4,000. This is, of course, business time. If somebody is making revenue, it's good to scale. Now, if you are a company that 1.4 billion, if that scale is happening, scale itself is a problem. But it's very aspiring to nurture that kind of world's largest technology. While that is very required to scale, but how do we address that is also a question mark.
no, so very valid point. I think
See the problems. Take that number of things. See, if you look at only you can take only 50 or you can take only 100. Now VAT is taking 20,000 rupees. 4,500 companies. Why this New York point of pricing should evolve? It can be not just building, right? It's about where is the talent to build capability. So
we can't also.
Yeah, actually now there is one slide which I have. Good old traditional method was only off campus, on campus, or an external partner. Now there are 17 different avenues. Now somebody said that we tied up with Coursera. We could as a solution also. The whole idea is to provide solution. Coursera is there. The NASCOM future skills is there. There are external partners who are coming and building something. Will this solve the problem? This is something maybe we will have to go deeper to understand. Now to your point of that there is no great academicians who can teach the new age technology.
Companies are established.
Question which you have to do.
And the nice practice right, the time of research. So there
Also there.
So you can't expect or demand the company to invest time there.
See, center of excellence is there, but
To stay informed about the startup ecosystem, subscribe to My Startup TV.